Welcome back to the Life on Books podcast. My name is Tony. With me, as always, is Andy, aka Metafictional Meathead. Today, we're going to be doing a half and half episode. We're going to do a deep dive on The Sympathizer by Viet Thanh Nguyen, and then we are also going to talk about audiobooks broadly.
I'm glad you introduced the book because I would not have pronounced that well at all.
Asian names for my American brain are very difficult.
I think I would have sounded out the last name well enough, but
yes,
Viet, I could have figured that out.
Yes. Yeah, there's actually, from what I read online, there's some debate about the pronunciation of, I guess, his middle name.
Oh.
So, okay, here's what always confuses me about Asian names in American culture is that in Asia, the family name goes first.
Right.
But then I don't know if this has been switched to be Americanized. So then you're like...
I can never tell.
I probably should have made sure out of respect for this author because this sounds incredibly disrespectful, but it is what it is. We're just stupid bros on a podcast. So as will now be our tradition, I guess we'll start by discussing what we're currently reading. I don't have a ton of updates just because we are podcasting semi-frequently now.
Yeah.
And I've also been struggling with sleep apnea. So I basically have really struggled to read for more than 15 minutes at a time. And I literally, it's not even like, ooh, I'm getting tired. Like I will literally fall asleep and like drop the book. So I've made a couple changes that have helped with that. So I was able to read a little bit more this week and finish up a couple things.
Well, I've been reading a ton, so hopefully
yeah.
I can
So
pick up the slack for both of us.
Why don't you start since you've been reading quite a bit?
Okay. Well, obviously, I recently finished The Sympathizer. I talked about how I had started that the last time we got together. We'll get into that more today, obviously. I think I have finished pretty much every book that I was talking about reading. The last time I was here, I talked about As the Wolf Howls at My Door by Chandler Broussard. I was correct. The plot didn't come back. I think it just kind of branched further out. I wanted to like it more than I did, which is never a fun, like, there's so many books that like, I really want to read this. I really want to like this or this author. And it just never hits for me. But it had its moments of brilliance and other times it just is like, where's this going? What's going on here? I finished Baron Wenckheim's Homecoming, the big red one by Laszlo Kraznahorkai.
The big red one.
The big red one. That was fantastic. It'll definitely be on my year-end list. It probably a little bit of recency bias talking here, but I think it's probably one of my favorite works by him. If not one, definitely number two. What else did I finish? Oh, I read Same Bed, Different Dreams by Ed Park.
I just want to point out that this is a very Andy thing to do. I think multiple times I have started a book like maybe a week or two before you and like read a little bit and been like, I think you'll like this. And then you start it and just like finish it like in 2 days.
You were right. I loved it. I also had a lot of free time that weekend that I read it. I don't know what happened. I just had time to read. And I plowed through it. It was a really fantastic book. Really interesting narrative. Really interesting the way there's kind of the three separate narratives and the way they all kind of converge as the book goes on. I hope we can talk about it more at length once you finich. But
yeah, I'm like 160 pages in right now.
Yeah. I really enjoyed it. As I said to you over text after I finished, kind of one of the main themes of the book is Park kind of questioning what history is. And I think choosing the Korean War and the history of Korea, but especially the Korean War, often called the Forgotten War, is really the perfect kind of setting to approach that. I know you had kind of talked about how you have read up on Korean history out of your own personal interest, but so you'll probably have some more background knowledge on a lot of the subjects he touches than I did, or maybe most readers will. But there was so much in there that I didn't know.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting. I had said this to you and a few other people. We talked a little bit in our last episode about like the gravity's rainbow and Pynchon comparisons. I still don't really think that was the best descriptor.
Well, I'm basically a little over 1/5 of the way through the book, so I can't speak on it as in depth as you can. But I think that thematically it is similar in the sense of like kind of questioning what is real, what is not real.
I think it was one of those things where like it kind of checked enough boxes.
Yeah.
Where they can, the guy writing the pull quote or someone at the publisher can be like, this is Pynchon, this is Gravity's Rainbow. I think how I had described it was like it has some Pynchon-esque characteristics, but as a work, it's as a whole body of work, I didn't think it was very Pynchon-esque. How I actually compared it to someone, talking to someone, if anyone listening has read Libra by Don DeLillo, I think Park uses the history of Korea and the Korean War to examine history in kind of the same way that DeLillo used the JFK assassination to examine history and how, like, so I think it, in my personal opinion, it was more comparable to that. And I don't mean this as a knock at all against Park's book, because it will 100% be one of my favorite books of the year.
Yeah, you seemed like really
I
really
loved
psyched
it.
on
I think anyone listening, if you follow Tony or I on Instagram, if you seem to like similar books to us, I think you will really enjoy this. I think everyone should read it. I just felt like it was more comparable to Libra than Gravity's Rainbow. But that's, like I said, not a knock. If anything, I would call that a compliment, because I think Libra is one of DeLillo's best books. So
yeah, and again, with the small sample size that I have for both these books, to me it still is very much like Infinite Jest. And I think, like what you just said at the beginning of this episode, where you're like these three narratives kind of converge, I feel like that is kind of like Infinite Jest. Like in Infinite Jest, you're getting thrown a lot of characters, and everyone tells you like they all matter, like stick with it. And so I kind of get like a similar vibe, and you can already see, like, even at 150 or 160 pages in or whatever, you can already see some of the plot lines starting to intertwine in Same Bed, Different Dreams. So I think what I'm really enjoying about it is the pop culture that Ed Park mentions in the book is very much like maybe a little bit of the generation before me, but also my generation stuff.
yeah,
like there's talks about Odd Job from one of the James Bond movies, which is like, I grew up watching those with my dad, and like, so that I mean, he's a little bit, I think Ed's probably in his 50s, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, but maybe late 40s, early 50s. So he's not that much older than me.
right.
So a lot of like the pop culture stuff he references, like I'm aware of.
Yeah.
And then just with, like you said, like the Korean, my slightly above average knowledge of like Korean history. So I'm enjoying that. Anything else you're reading currently that's worth talking about?
I mean, I've finished a bunch of books recently. I've a lot of short ones. The only book I'm actively reading right now is actually The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. I'm about 200 pages in, and I'm really enjoying that. I messaged you. I had started earlier this week, Monument Maker by David Keenan, which I think I had talked about on one of the episodes we recorded.
You mentioned it, yeah.
I don't know if that one ever made it live. It was the one we talked about, like what we were looking forward to reading.
Oh, yeah.
But it wasn't for me. I think I made it like 80 pages.
Yeah.
I was a little bummed out just because I've heard a lot of great things by people whose tastes I really trust, and it wasn't for me. It is what it is.
Yeah.
But I've been, like I said, 200 pages into Grapes of Wrath, and I'm really digging it. I know in previous episodes I've talked about how much I really enjoyed East of Eden.
Yeah.
When I read that way back when. So it's been fun to get back into a classic. A lot of We talked before about how I tend to stick to stuff like post World War II. And I feel like a lot this year I've been even closer to like turn of the century stuff.
Yeah.
So to go back to something pre-World War II has been interesting, and it's good to get some classics in every now and then.
Yeah, can't go wrong with
So.
Steinbeck, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just finished up Storm of Steel, which I talked about. I was reading last time, and World War I memoir by Ernst Jünger, kind of considered like one of the best. I did end up liking it more than Robert Graves' Goodbye to All That, which is like kind of like everyone says like that's the best memoir. I didn't love either of them, and I think what I really appreciate about All Quiet on the Western Front, which is actually fiction, but the author did fight in World War I, is he was able to take things that really happened and then just put them into more of a meaningful narrative.
Right.
The problem with the World War I memoir is like, and I mentioned this before, World War I was kind of about nothing. So, so it's literally just like, if you're really interested in like what the day-to-day life of a soldier in World War I was like, then this book is definitely for you. But it just gets a little old. It's like, there was literally one sentence. It was like, yeah, I woke up, made a pot of coffee, saw a plane get shot down, the pilot, ejected and the parachute deployed. And then he just like goes on and like moves on to something else. And you're like, and? Like, what? Okay, like what do I do with that information, So
It's very existential. Like, what is the point of life? Like, I'm just
and there was
starting my day and I watch a plane get shot down. That's
the guy is clearly extremely intelligent. I mean, he went on to have a writing career and wrote several books, but he didn't really spend a lot of time kind of like reflecting. There were some moments where he was, he saw one of his friends get killed and he's like talking about how it emotionally impacted him. And it's like, that's the stuff that's worth reading, in my opinion.
Right.
Not that you want to hear about people getting killed, but that's kind of like, the other problem is that World War I was so long.
right.
And it was just like mind-numbingly the same. And it was like the way trench warfare would work is, one side would use artillery and drop mortars and bombard the other side. And so they would go in their bunkers and just like wait it out. And then they would come out because then they knew, all right, now they're done with their artillery. They're going to send like ground troops and have a frontal attack. So all these guys would rush the line. They'd all get shot down, and then they would retreat, and then the other side would do the same thing. Then and it was just like this back and forth. That's why most of it was like a stalemate. There was really no major progress on one side or the other. And so it's like the guy was in the war the whole 4 or 5 years or whatever. So it's just like he's talking about all these battles that really had no significance. And they were fought mostly the same way. Mm-hmm. The book doesn't really get super interesting until there's like 2 chapters at the end of like the final like do or die battle. And if they, he fought for Germany, it was like, if we don't win this, like we're done. Like the war is basically over. Right. And they don't. And so it's like kind of interesting. It's like this extra layer of complication to it. But yeah, the writing is not bad. It's just very plain and matter of fact. And there's nothing in the book that really stands out in my mind as far as like, ooh, yeah, this part or when he said that. So it was kind of a tough read to get through. And then I started Schopenhauer's Telescope, which came out in 2003. The author is Gerard Brown, I think. I don't know much about the author or the book. I don't even remember where the recommendation came from. I just remember like seeing it, being like, "This sounds awesome." Mm-hmm. And it's not a long book. It's like 250 pages and maybe like 30 or 40 pages in. And it's about a guy who I think that it's not super clear, but it's like a guy who's a prisoner of war during the Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina conflict.
Okay.
And he's like digging what might be his own grave, like literally digging a grave. So it's pretty serious.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
But it's like the writing is really good. Like it's a type of book that like you're sucked in like page one. So, and then cool. I'm still making my way through Same Bed, Different Dreams, which I'm really enjoying. It's the type of book that I actually think if you are interested in postmodern literature, for lack of a better term, this book, Same Bed, might be like a good entryway because the writing is not super complicated.
I agree.
The writing is well done.
Yes.
But it's not, what's the term that you used the other day? It's not a lot of firepower or
Pyrotechnics.
Pyrotechnics, that's right. That's right. There's not a lot of pyrotechnics in the writing, which I actually think is like harder to do sometimes. But there's a lot of clever bits.
Yes.
And it's wildly funny. Like multiple times I've laughed out loud.
Yeah. I think it has that, the writing is that really good middle ground between like plain matter of fact and heavy, dense prose where you have to, reread it a couple times to figure out what's actually going on.
Right.
It's well written, but it's not so dense that you can't figure out what's happening.
Yes.
And I think like you were kind of saying, it's very, it does have that style where like kind of that postmodern style where it's not necessarily the same. There's different narratives, but the writing in each narrative is different as well.
Yeah.
And particularly the different like dreams sections, how it's that kind of like fragmented style.
Yeah.
Typically, like I don't really connect well with style, with writing like that.
Because it's almost like bullet points.
Right. That kind of vignette fragment, like you said, bullet points. But I think maybe it's because of the way it's like tied into what's happening in the other narratives, or maybe, credit to Park. It's just really well done.
Yeah.
Like I just got so sucked in, I think it's just a really good book. But yeah, really, really interesting narrative. Great book, hard to put down.
Yeah. It's it's funny, like you posted about it and someone's like, that's not even out yet. It's just like, yeah.
Shout out to Random House for sending us copies.
Yeah. It's like you guys can get books early too,
Yeah.
They're happy to send them. I mean, they're not going to send them to everybody, but if you have some semblance of a following and can say something semi-intelligent, they'll probably send you a copy of it.
Yeah. I just asked, I think you asked as well, right? You just reached out and was like,
yeah,
hey.
you had told me, you said, hey, this book's coming out. From what everyone's told me, it's probably right up your alley. And I said, oh, cool. So I reached out and then I got a copy and I said, actually, Andy, I think it'll be right up your alley. And
right.
Like, okay, I'm going to ask for a copy too.
Right.
So yeah, it's from Random House. And
I actually had asked for a copy prior to you. I had messaged the wrong Random House.
Yes. So for those that don't know, the way the modern publishing industry works is there's a handful of conglomerates, and then they all have smaller imprints, which and those imprints are basically just like subcorporations, for lack of a better term, that specialize in particular genres or whatever. So, the big daddy is Penguin Random House, which used to be two separate companies, I believe, and they merged when the industry changed with Amazon, being a thing and all that stuff. But and now, so it's Random House, the imprint that is putting out Same Bed. So it can get very confusing. And I'll probably do a whole episode on how to get free books because there are a few different things you can do. But with a big company like Penguin Random House, they have an influencer program where you can apply for it, and then they actually want you to like earn points and do all this stuff, and then they'll send you, because they want to see that you're like actively, you're not just like trying to scam them out of free books, basically.
Which is understandable, but then there's other ones where it's like, because I think I looked into it as well, and I totally understand. Like you don't want to just give books to people because they ask. People are just like clearly scamming.
Right.
I try to not that I even know a ton of people to like reach out to and get in contact with, but I try to not ask for a book if I'm not genuinely interested in it.
Right.
Because I don't want to, I don't want to just take advantage of it. I don't want to end up in a position where I feel obligated to something I
Yeah.
don't want to read because, because I got sent a copy. I've had a few instances where people have reached out to me and have asked me, excuse me, if I wanted a copy of a book, and I've been like,
Nah.
well, I haven't said no because I have a problem, but I've prefaced it with like, it sounds interesting. I have other stuff going on.
Yeah. No guarantees on this.
I can't guarantee I'll get to it anytime soon.
Right.
And, if that's going to be a problem, then, I won't be upset if you change your mind.
Yeah.
But
yeah, so there's people that are obviously actively reaching out because they work for a company or a publisher, or they're somehow related to the author, and they want to promote it, and so that's part of it, just to like build up some hype around it. There's a couple programs where you literally just like check off a list of genres that you're interested in, and they just send you books at random.
right.
I've gotten a few now that way, and it's been like a miss every time for me. I'm like, I'm not really interested in
What
this.
was that? Henry Winkler.
The Henry Winkler memoir. There was another memoir by someone I'd never even heard of before, and it's like growing up as a woman with mental illness. And I was like, this is just not really a subject I'm not interested in.
Yeah.
But they're cool because it comes with like a note that just says like, if you review it, use these hashtags, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But there's no real expectation that you have to.
I was a little bothered when I looked into one, and it was like, if you have X amount of followers, you can qualify. And that's just like I get it. You want to get eyes on your book, but also like, it's that if you're depriving someone that is actually interested, is likely to leave a good review,
Right.
and can speak coherently versus like a 60-second TikTok or reel talking about how pretty the cover is, or how
your favorite
whatever,
thing to comment on.
I don't want to just rehash the same gags, but it just says a whole lot of nothing in 60 seconds.
Right.
But they have 10,000 followers. Like, I feel like you're depriving the wrong person.
Yeah, someone had asked me like, or maybe just commented like, "Oh, I'm surprised that these companies like send out so many books." And if you think about it, it doesn't take much for them to recoup their money.
Right.
So a lot of times the advanced reader copies, the ARCs that you get, are a much lower quality than the actual printed.
Right.
I think like Sand Bad Different Dreams is only coming out on hardcover.
Yeah.
And we have like kind of like chintzy.
I've talked to someone that has both an ARC and the hardcover, and they said the hardcover is fantastic.
Yeah, it's really So it's usually like thinner paper. Like you'll notice the cover will like get bent really easily on the ARC and stuff. So their cost to print it's not much. And then if like maybe let's say 2 people buy the book because of my review, which is a very low bar, very low bar, like they've already made money.
Right.
Between the cost to print it and like the thing to ship it to me. So,
right. I mean, I've already had, and I don't mean to sound arrogant here, but I've already had a handful of people just like, I haven't shared a real review.
Right.
I've just posted on like my Instagram story.
Of course. Yeah.
How much I really loved it. I think I put in my October recap that it was going to be one of my favorite books of the year. And I've already had a handful of people kind of reach out and be like, based off what you said, I'm going to buy it.
Yeah. So that's the thing is like, the way it typically works is I'll get maybe 2 to 5 comments on a post sometimes that'll be like, "Oh, thank you for the recommendation. I'm going to go check this out." There's that many people, which is not a ton, but there's that many people saying it. How many people are just going to do it without even leaving a comment?
Right.
You like on Instagram and TikTok, you can see like 18 people shared this post or 38 people saved it on TikTok. It's like they're saving it because they want to go back later to remind themselves to go pick it up.
Right.
So it is a good way to market for these companies. So there are the programs you can apply for. They all have different structures. But then, like, if you are interested in a book that's right up your alley, you can always just DM them on Instagram.
Right.
They check those inboxes, and it's unlikely that they're going to say no unless you have like 0 followers, like you just have no presence. But it's just like, yeah, if you're interested in a book and you're asking for it, they know you're probably not going to say anything bad about it.
Right.
So you're very likely to enjoy it and give it a positive review and
Right.
recommend it to your friends. So
I've also heard of some, you know, most of the time it's going to be like, sorry, we're all out of review copies. Like we hit our allotment.
Sure, yeah.
They're not going to straight up be like, no, we don't like you.
right.
And most of the time, if they don't have a physical copy, they will send you. Most publishers will offer to send you an ebook,
Yeah.
or a digital ARC. And it's, a PDF that's got watermarks all over it,
Right.
but it's still very readable.
Yeah.
Which if you're, if you're in it to read the book and not just, I don't particularly like reading ebooks, so it's usually something like I'm all set, or I download it and don't get around to it. But like, if you're in it for more than just the free book and you actually want to read, then
yeah.
the digital ARCs are pretty easy to come by too. But
One thing I gotta ask, and it'll vary a lot by company, but I do want to start planning on giving away the books that I get, because I'm not gonna want to keep all of them.
right.
So I have to ask them if I can do like some type of promotion or something.
Yeah.
Like, share this post and be entered for a giveaway, blah blah blah, whatever. So
The moral of the story is that Tony and I are very popular. So if you have a book you're trying to promote, send us copies.
yeah, well, I mean, what do you have? What, like 1,800 followers?
Not even.
I have 3,100 something maybe. So we're not huge accounts.
Yeah.
But I do think people probably.
Someone sent me a message the other day, like asking for tips on how to grow their account. They're like, I'm new, just setting up my Bookstagram. And I was like, I don't know, man. I just like, it's never been a goal of mine to like grow an account. It's certainly been fun, and I like to see, get that little dopamine hit of the numbers going up. But like, it's never been my goal. I've always just wanted to like foster a place to talk about books and share, and if people like it, that's cool. But I was like, I don't know. I tend to do well, get a lot of engagement if I post a book I make a post with a bunch of books versus one.
Yeah.
And that's about it. So, and like, I just, sometimes I'd hop on like hashtag trend, different challenges and things like that. So
I think Instagram is a little bit harder to grow. Well, YouTube is probably the absolute hardest, because basically if you can't make videos, you can't be on YouTube. It's just not a thing. TikTok is a little bit easier because you obviously still have to make videos. It's a video platform, but you don't really have to be good at it. In fact, less overly produced content tends to do a little bit better over there. Instagram is tough because Instagram has been going through an identity crisis for the last few years.
Right.
And so what I've found on Instagram is like things that were working to grow really early on when I started aren't working anymore, And so when I first started posting about books, it was basically like reels or die. If you have to post reels, like photos on Instagram are dead. And now that's not really the case anymore. Now it's like you should be doing a balanced approach of photos, especially carousels. Like don't post one photo at a time. Stories are super important. And the CEO of Instagram actually did a very in-depth interview, and he said that the feature that was used most on Instagram is DMs.
Really?
It's used as a messenger app more than any other feature that they have. And so all of these platforms, their number one goal is to keep you on the platform for as long as possible, because the longer you're on there for, the more ads they can show you. And that's how they get paid. People pay them to run ads on their platform. So basically what he was saying was like, if you can get people to message you, that's like really good for your account because it's keeping people on the platform. So making really shareable content is really, really powerful. And so I just don't really have the time or desire to like do a lot of photos or carousels and all this like fancy stuff. I just make videos. I'm a video guy, so I just make videos.
Yeah, I don't put a lot of most of my posts are pretty low effort. It's a picture of a book, it's a picture of a stack of books. If I do like when I'm doing the monthly recaps or whatever, I'll do my stack showing all the spines, and then I'll do a carousel of like all the covers.
Yeah.
Because I think it's fun, but like,
But the thing, but
I'm
I
not
think,
like trying to do it with the intent of like, oh, this is going to get a lot of shares, or
right.
this is going to get me more followers, things like that.
But I think it's worth mentioning that, let's say you have 1,500 followers, and that's not a ton, but it's not nothing either.
Right.
Like I know people who are trying to build Instagrams and don't even have 1,000. You know what I mean? So I think it really highlights the fact that even if you're trying to grow, the most important thing is authenticity.
Right.
That's why you have 1,500 followers, even though you're in your mind, it's like low effort, right?
Right.
I'm not trying to grow, but you're making authentic posts. That is why it's working. If you took that and you actually tried to grow, then you'd probably have a lot more. But that's the biggest thing is like authenticity. So, and it's funny, like I have obviously all this fancy gear because this is what I do professionally. And I do it the way I like to do it because it's me. But sometimes I do think like, yeah, this is probably a little too overproduced. It's not coming across authentic enough. And a great example is I have videos that I spent literally hours on that got maybe like 1,500 views. And then I had that video about when I was at the old number 6 depot and there was a bat hanging on the book.
Yeah.
And I literally got home from the store. I busted out my phone and I was like, I just saw this bat hanging off a book. And I had grabbed a couple video clips of it in the store. That video did like I think like 40,000 views on Instagram and like 60,000 on TikTok. It was just like me and my phone, like no lighting,
Right.
no professional audio, no script, no fancy edits, nothing.
Right.
It's just like people resonated with the authenticity of it. So,
Well, there you go. Be authentic, be yourself. Don't try too hard.
there you go. Yeah, whoever that person was at, there's their advice.
That person was Jack's Paperbacks. Give him a follow.
All right. Shout out to Jax. Okay, so let's get into the purported topic of today's video, which is the Sympathizer. So for those that don't know, the Sympathizer is a 2016 work of fiction. It won the Pulitzer Prize that year, and it is about a Vietnamese soldier. Technically, he fights for the North Vietnamese, but he's working as an undercover spy for the Southern Vietnamese, and then gets exiled from Vietnam after the fall of Saigon to the U.S.
Right.
So, and there's no real spoilers there because all this happens pretty early on in the book.
He's a communist sympathizer.
Yes,
Hence the title.
correct. So, and I guess the general theme of the book is how his life is kind of fragmented into these different segments. He has his what he believes might be his true self as a, communist, his role as a soldier in the Southern Vietnamese army, and then also as a transplant. But I believe in the book, he's also not 100% Vietnamese. One of his parents is French.
Yes. His father is a French priest.
Yes.
Some that had come over from France.
So true, full-blooded Vietnamese folks don't see him as true Vietnamese.
Right.
And then, of course...
His mother also had him out of wedlock. So they all, like, everyone just refers to him as a bastard.
Right.
And for periods, he doesn't always know who his father is, or he knows, but father's not really around.
Yeah.
So, and at that time, I don't know what it's like in Vietnam now, but at that time, and I'm sure it was like this in the U.S. too, but like he's a bastard. Like,
yeah,
stay away.
It's a bad deal.
Yeah,
And
talks
then
about how people aren't interested in, don't want to be his friends.
right.
He talks about how like it doesn't matter if he has significant feelings for this girl or woman because he's a bastard, so her family's not going to approve.
Right. Yeah, and then there's the extra layer of complication of being an immigrant in the United States, which comes with its own challenges. Even if you weren't an immigrant in the United States, but you were of Asian heritage, you would still face quite a few challenges of racism.
Right.
So he has both of those things working against him. So, yeah, I guess it's a book about, well, on its surface, it's a book about identity.
Yes.
but it's multi-layered and kind of hidden behind the larger story of what's happening in Vietnam and communism. One thing that was really interesting to me that I didn't know was that there are no Southern Vietnamese names on the Vietnam Memorial. They have their own separate memorial somewhere in the U.S. I can't recall where it is, but we kind of think of this is true for the Korean War and this is true for Vietnam. We kind of think of it like we went in there and like saved the day, but in reality, we were actually fighting side by side with these people.
Right. What I thought was very interesting, and is not something I had normally considered. It's when they are exiled to America, and it's not just. Is he named?
The protagonist is not named.
Okay, I
didn't realize that till about a third of the way through.
I think I was like probably halfway or a quarter of the way through, and I was like, "Does he have a name?" Like,
he does not.
I'm too deep to like go back and look.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I think they mostly refer to him by Captain, which is his title. So we'll just call him the Captain.
Yep. We could call him the Sympathizer.
We could call him the Sympathizer. So, him and there's the general's family, a lot of the other members of the military go with, it's not like he's gotten on a helicopter by himself and going back. There's a lot of people going from Vietnam to America with him. And, they take some time to adjust to life in America. And then they're all kind of like, oh, we're going to rally the troops and go back to Vietnam and kick the communists out and take back our country. And they're all gung-ho about it. And the Americans are like, who cares? Like, we're back. It's over. Move on. And I think that's a very apt kind of, not really a metaphor, but like, how many times does America go into a country and, we did it, we saved the day, and then they leave, and this country is in ruins.
Yeah.
And America's like, oh, that sucks for you guys. Sorry about that. Good luck with that.
Ever heard of the Middle East?
Right. Or Central America or South America.
Oh,
or
God. Pretty much everywhere.
Indochina.
Yeah. Oh, God. Oh, yeah.
Right. But, that was very striking to me. I guess in general, I had never really considered the immediate afterlife of Vietnamese exiles in America. From previous like movies and maybe some books that I've read, I've picked up on things about the like sentiments towards Americans in Vietnam, post Vietnam War.
Yeah.
But for some reason, the idea of Vietnamese exiles in America post Vietnam had never really clicked. So that was a cool experience. Cool.
Yeah.
That was an eye-opening experience, I guess, a better way to put it.
Yes.
So that was really interesting. And I think this is kind of unrelated. It's something that popped into my head, and I was thinking about when we first discussed talking about this today. I think in a way it kind of reminded me, not necessarily narratively or thematically, of 1984, but in the way that 1984, when it was published, it was banned in America for being pro-communist and it was banned in Russia for being anti-communist.
Love it.
I feel like there are kind of similar sentiments to this.
Yes.
Like, on one hand, you're not sure. Obviously, the protagonist is a communist spy, but it's not ever like, and he supports communist ideas. He has comrades, but it doesn't really, except for a few moments, there's never this like slap you across the face like communism is awesome.
Right.
But at the same time, it's never like communism is bad. It kind of rides that line of like,
right. So
it rides that gray area.
Well, I'm glad you thought it was also reminiscent of 1984, because I think in the reel I did about it, my 60-second review, I did say it was like a blend of like Catch-22 and 1984. Especially the last third of the book is very 1984-ish.
Yeah.
We can't talk about that too much without spoiling it, but there's definitely some elements of that, whether they were intentional or not. I could see like similar themes and maybe some inspiration from 1984.
Yeah.
What's interesting to me is like you were saying, like we have this history in the States of kind of just going in, up, and then oops, see you later.
Right.
And it's interesting that you just read Same Bed by Ed Park, because the Korean War, if you look back, is almost like the trial run of Vietnam.
Right.
It was just like, we didn't call it a war. We called it the Korean War was called a police action, actually.
All right.
Yep. They told the soldiers, it's not a war. You're just going in there for a police action. We just need to basically police, some stuff going on. And then we get there. It's a literal, violent, horrible, brutal war with mortars and tanks and the whole thing. Everything you get with war, just death and destruction. Scorched earth policy, which was exactly how it was in Vietnam. And then Vietnam's, we call it a war, but the U.S. government calls it a military conflict. That's how they referred to it. So it's not a war; it's a conflict. What difference does that make?
Right.
And same thing. We kind of went in there, just like napalmed everything, and that'll fix it. Let's just drop more bombs. And,
Right.
One thing I've really noticed a trend of with any book I've read from that general time period, or dealing with communism from the point of view of people who lived through it, is this situation where they actually don't have a right answer of what to do.
Right.
So it's like,
Excuse me.
you're good. You got some allergies?
Yeah, something.
Oh. It's like you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. You need 5?
No, I'm good.
Oh.
I'm good. Keep talking.
Andy's getting emotional over here. So this is also very prevalent in War Trash by Ha Jin, which is technically fiction, but it's a memoir that talks about the Korean War. And the theme is very prevalent in the Sympathizer too, where it's like, if you go with the South, with the capitalists, basically the Americans, you're facing a life of being treated like a second-class citizen, extreme racism, being a castaway, essentially, a piece of trash, just
Right.
like, you're just living on the fringes of society. And if you go with the communists, there's extremely strict rules, and you have to fall in line with the party. What a lot of people don't know is that there were quite a few people that were literally referred to as like sympathizers,
Right.
and were like on the side of the communists, but were not actually Communist Party members. And there was a very distinct line in China and Korea and Vietnam, I believe, as well, of like, you are part of the party or you are not part of the party.
Right.
Like in War Trash by Ha Jin, he's given a series of like jobs and missions to do from the communists, and they're like, if you pass these, then maybe we'll consider letting you be part of the party. But until you get to that point, like, we don't fully trust you, type of thing. So yeah, it was, for me, it was a big eye opener as well, to some of the kind of intricacies of what it would have been like to be a South Vietnamese soldier and have to flee to the U.S. And, we celebrate our Vietnam veterans now. I mean, obviously at the time there was a lot of people speaking out against the war, but we have in general a lot of reverence for soldiers and vets in America. And yeah, if you were South Vietnamese, you, like I said, you fought right alongside them.
Right.
Saigon fell, you fled to the U.S., and like no one's giving you any credit for trying to fight against communism. Like,
right.
So
there are a couple scenes in there where it was a congressman, not a governor. The congressman shows up and he is like speaking at these events where it's these Vietnamese veterans, and it's so obvious that it's just like pandering.
Yeah.
That's not like actually in support of or like, sympathetic of their endeavors. It's so obviously just trying to get votes.
Yeah. Yes. For sure.
So, and again, it's just more evidence of American citizens seeing these exiles as, like you said, second class or like objects. Just a tangible.
Yeah, they're war trash.
Right.
That Ha-Jin's novel is so poignantly named,
right?
Aptly named because
they're
that's
just kind of like leftovers. Like, gotta bring them back with us.
Yeah. It's just like okay, just the side effect of the byproduct of this situation. The other thing about communism is that in America, maybe less so now, but certainly like our parents' generation, they've been propagandized to believe that like communism was the worst possible thing that could ever happen.
Right.
And if you look at even like Mao Zedong, like in China, not everything that guy did was bad.
Right.
He did a lot of good things for the Chinese people. That's why he had so many supporters. It's not like people woke up one day and they were like, you know what, I want to live under an oppressive regime. It's like, no, they already lived under an oppressive regime with Chiang Kai-shek, and they were like, this sucks. This guy's promising me a better life through X, Y, and Z, so I'm going to go along with it. And every single time, it was mostly exploited by some type of psychopath. Stalin, Mao, Kim Il-sung, all these dictators. And the way I like to look at it is like, I'm not a religious person by any means, but like, I don't think anyone would take like, let's say the 10 Commandments from Christianity and be like, oh, those are terrible. Like, no, generally those are good rules to live by.
They're pretty solid guidelines.
Yeah. But we've all seen people who have taken religion and used it as a pretext for their actions, and those actions are not in line with those principles whatsoever.
Right.
Whether it's like Westboro Baptist Church or the Crusades, you know what I mean? Like there's so many examples, and there's examples way outside of Christianity. Those are just the ones I'm, obviously most familiar with as being a white American. But so it's like, is communism itself like really the boogeyman, or was it just the fact that it was an easy way for people to capitalize on, exploring their own psychopathy?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
right.
So, I think I told you, so I just read The Bridge at No Gun Ri, which is about the Korean War, and the country got divided at the 38th parallel because the Soviets were stationed in the north, the Americans were stationed in the south, and obviously America wanted to have their influence after World War II of what Korea was going to do because they had just been, quote unquote, liberated from Japan.
Right.
And the Americans were like, yeah, let's we'll just poll the people, see what kind of government they want. It was like 70% were like socialism.
Right.
And they're like, ooh, here comes a puppet government.
Right, right.
Like, we can't have that.
It's a real classic American move.
Yeah. And so it's just like the people wanted a different style of government. You could say, well, look what happened with communism in the North. Okay, fine. But it's like, is that a result of their economic policy, or is that the result of the fact that they were basically cut off from the rest of the world because we were like communism bad?
Right.
Like, Russia didn't really care. They bounced. They didn't really do much for North Korea. And then we were just like, haha, guys,
right.
Yeah. So it's a wild thing, man. I don't know. This book, I thought really made you feel like in it. Like you could really empathize with the character, and you're like, oh, these are scenarios I never really even dreamed were a thing.
Yeah. I think you could feel a lot of empathy for kind of people on both sides. Obviously the perspective of this narrative is from someone who's a communist sympathizer. but there's also some snippets in there of other Communist Party members who are like, loud and proud, and their struggles, both with like the secret police in Vietnam kind of going after communists, the Americans searching out communists, and then obviously having to like kind of hide your true identity, but then also just like seeing the effects of the, like we've already kind of talked at length about the exiles, but like seeing these people who were like held in such high regard
Right.
in their country,
Yes.
and then like they're hit such a wall in America, or even staying in Vietnam or that kind of Indochina area, like they're kind of just reduced to nothing.
Yeah, and class warfare is not a concept that's reserved only for for America. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like there's classism and racism between China and Japan and China and Vietnam, and a lot of those countries, the culture was we're better than
Right.
Japan thought they were better than China, and China thought they were better than Korea, and so you come over, and that's even explored in the book a little bit because he has a love interest and she's Japanese, or she Chinese.
I don't remember.
She's not Vietnamese.
No.
But that's also kind of plays a role, like you said, like, oh, you're a bastard, my family
Right.
never accept you. But
And
it's also
he has a problem like just saying her first name.
right. Yeah. So it's just so complex on so many levels. Let's shift gears just a little bit. What was your impression of the writing itself?
I thought it was good.
Yeah.
I thought it was good. I think it was kind of similar to how I described what's going on, or the writing, excuse me, in Same Bed, where it's like not that very plain, matter of fact, just kind of going through the motions writing, but it's not this super dense prose.
Yep. It's a good middle ground.
It's a good middle ground where like you can follow along with the plot, but you can also just enjoy the writing for the quality of the writing.
Yep.
I think there are a few moments in there where certainly the narrative itself is enough to kind of pull at your heartstrings a little bit, but it's just written in such a way that it really like amplifies that effect. Some of the moments where the protagonist is talking about being a bastard and how he's just always worn this label his whole life.
Yeah.
And it's been his identity, more or less. And he's kind of stuck with it, and him like talking about that. I thought that was really, some of those moments were really well done. So
Yeah, I totally agree. I thought that you had to pay attention, but you didn't. It didn't feel like work.
right.
That type of dense reading where you're just like, all right, let me make sure that I'm really focused right now. I thought it was fairly well paced. I did think the end dragged on just a little bit.
Just a hair, yeah.
It was tough to read because of what
The end got pretty gruesome.
It got pretty gruesome.
Without spoiling anything. I don't even necessarily think it was a bad ending.
No, not at all.
I just think like it went on a little bit. It could have landed the plane a little bit sooner.
Yeah.
And
I'm sure that's how the protagonist felt too.
but it certainly wasn't like the book was a drag. I don't even necessarily think the ending was a drag. Like I wasn't like anxious for it to be over. I wasn't sitting there like on like,
Right.
It's just it went on a little too long.
You're just like, okay, guy,
we get it. We get it,
Yeah.
Um
I think part of it was just like because it was kind of gruesome.
yeah.
What's funny to me is
I think it's also probably pretty indicative of what that situation was like.
yes, that's true.
Again, can't really discuss the specifics. I don't want to spoil anything, but like,
Well, if the goal was to put us into his shoes, then mission definitely accomplished.
yes, yeah. I don't think a shortened a shortened version of the, what would you say, the last like 80 to 100 pages, I think.
Probably less than 100,
Probably,
but
yeah.
but somewhere
50 to 80. We'll call it 50
yeah.
to 80. Like, I think had that been reduced, it would not be a true perspective of the situation the character was in.
I think that's
so.
fair, yeah.
You know, I think you kind of have to take the good with, I'm going to say the good with the bad, because it wasn't bad. You know, so.
Cormac McCarthy famously doesn't use quotation marks.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember reading a quote about that, saying, he basically said, like, if the writing is good, you don't need them. They just kind of clutter up the page. And I was like, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, Cormac. Like, I think Cormac McCarthy is a great writer. But sometimes I read, like when I was reading All the Pretty Horses, there was a few instances where I was like, I kind of wish there were quotation marks to make it a little clearer.
Right.
There were a few times in like All the Pretty Horses where I was like, I kind of wish there were quotation marks. Not all the time, but sometimes. Mm. I did not realize that this book did not use quotation marks until I was about halfway through it.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, Cormac McCarthy was right, but this guy is actually like demonstrating how it can be right.
Right. I think I picked up on it a little bit sooner. I think I've read a handful of books where it's like that, where there's really not any quote. There's either the author will use something other than quotation marks to denote dialogue.
Which I think he does, right? He uses like a dash.
I don't think he uses anything.
Maybe I'm thinking of something else. No, you're right. He doesn't use anything.
You know, I think I've read enough books where there aren't quotation marks to not be as like, say not affected, but it doesn't like stick out to me as much, or I'm just kind of like, okay, this is how it is.
Yeah.
But I would agree with you. I think it's done really well in the Sympathizer.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think there were that any times where I was like, wait, was that dialogue? Was that
I would love to ask him
exposition?
Why do you choose to do
I've
that?
always been curious of that as well.
Yeah.
What the reasoning behind it, especially William Gaddis is an author that almost never uses quotations marks. He'll use like a dash.
Right.
There'll be a dash before a line of dialogue. And
there's something else I was just reading that was like that.
I've seen a few other authors that do the same thing. I think I don't know about his other works, but I'm pretty sure in Infinite Jest, Wallace just uses a single like apostrophe on either end. You know, it's not a full quotation mark.
Huh.
And I've always kind of wanted to ask, like, you're still using something to denote
right
dialogue. Why not the quotation marks?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
It's. I don't necessarily have a problem with it.
Yeah, I don't know. Interesting.
If anyone has any insight on that, hit me up.
Well, I think McCarthy just said it like unnecessarily marks up the page.
I get that. Like,
aesthetically or whatever.
I understand the stylistic choice of not using anything.
But why substitute?
If you're going to use something, why use something else?
Yeah.
And like I said, I don't have a problem with it. I actually kind of like the dash. I think it's an interesting choice.
Yeah, as long as it's consistent, it makes sense.
Yeah, I'm just curious what leads to it.
Yeah. So, well, we've just cracked an hour, and we were curious if we could fill a whole episode about this book. I know we talked a little bit at length about what we're currently reading, but anything else you want to say about this? Oprah gave it a glowing review.
Well, we know Jonathan Franzen won't like it then.
Any quotes that stood out to you? I'd see you didn't really.
I feel like I had a couple spots that I marked. Let me flip through. I haven't been flagging anything lately. I keep the pen by, and we'll like mark lines, but
let me do the cheat way. My copy's upstairs, which is.
I feel like I have gotten away from like sticking stuff. Partially because in the recent move, I think I just like tossed a bunch and picked up more or lost. Okay, I found a couple that I bracketed. Hopefully they're good ones. I think one of these is kind of what I was talking about earlier about his identity.
Yep.
Although a misnomer when applied to me, I could hardly blame Americans for mistaking me as one of their own, since a small nation could be founded from the tropical offspring of the American GI. This stood for government issue, which is also what the Amerasians are. Our countrymen preferred euphemisms to acronyms, calling people like me the dust of life. More technically, the Oxford English Dictionary I consulted at Occidental revealed that I could be called a, quote, natural child. Well, the law in all countries I know of hails me as its illegitimate son. My mother called me her love child, but I do not like to dwell on that. In the end, my father had it right. He called me nothing at all.
Oof. Which is like, I mean, the fact that the character's not named is like, it's kind of cool how the interplay there.
Right.
My copy is quite marked up and flagged, but it's upstairs, so I'm just pulling up quotes online.
All right, here's another one I found. I think I might have a few more in here, but I don't think we need to go crazy. I'll just read this one more. Dare I admit it, dare I confess, America, land of supermarkets and superhighways, of supersonic jets and Superman, of supercarriers and the Super Bowl. America, a country not content simply to give itself a name on its bloody birth, but one that insisted for the first time in history on a mysterious acronym, USA, a trifecta of letters outdone later only by the quartet of the USSR. Although every country thought itself superior in its own way, was there ever a country that coined so many super terms from the federal bank of its narcissism, was not only super confident but also truly super powerful, that would not be satisfied until it locked every nation of the world into a full Nelson and made it cry Uncle Sam?
So good.
Which is like,
that's so good.
Everything we were talking about, like America wanting to get their hands involved in everything if they didn't like what nation, insert name of nation here was doing. Like, oh, we have to go and introduce them to democracy.
Yeah. I love this quote. This is short, but we don't succeed or fail because of fortune or luck. We succeed because we understand the world works and what we have to do. We fail because others understand this better than we do, which I think is like a lot about like accepting the fact that people are like racist or,
right.
You know, that America's just going to come in here and like blow everything up and like just leave,
right.
You know, just like accepting like the shittiness of the world. Yeah, there's a lot of quotes that I highlighted in my copy. I just thought it was a well-written book overall. What was your final rating?
I think on Goodreads I gave it 4 stars. I think in a perfect world where I had an app that could let me give fractional ratings, I might give it like 4.25 or 4.5.
I feel exactly the same way. I gave it a 4-star on Goodreads, but I really think it's more of a 4.5.
Yeah, I think it's a really good book. I think, you know, like we said, my only real critique is the ending, which again, I didn't dislike.
Yeah.
I think it fit well for the book. It just, at times felt a little long-winded, but it wasn't a bad ending. It wasn't like, in the last 50 pages, the quality of writing just like tanked.
Right.
Everything made sense for the book.
Yeah.
I just think it wasn't my favorite.
Yeah.
So I think it was a really, really solid, interesting book. Not too long. I mean, what is it, like 380 something pages?
Yeah, it's close to 4, I think.
Yeah, close to 400. But I mean, I think it gets at some of the ideas that some of the more popular mega novels get at without, it doesn't feel bloated.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really good book, and I think I would definitely recommend it.
Cool. Would you read anything else by him?
Probably.
Sweet.
I think, what was his other, one of them was a short story collection.
There's a short stories collection. There's a sequel to The Sympathizer. And then he just released his own memoir.
Okay.
Yeah. Here's his published works: The Sympathizer, The Committed, which is the sequel to The Sympathizer, The Refugees, which is the short stories.
Okay.
It looks like. Yeah, I believe The Refugees is a collection of short stories. Oh no, it is. It is.
Okay. All right.
But The Refugees came out between the Sympathizer and the sequel, the Committed.
Gotcha.
And then A Man of Two Faces, a memoir, just came out this year, which is
Interesting.
his nonfiction. It's about his life. So he's got 4 books.
Cool.
I'll probably get to all of them at some point.
I would be interested how the narrative in the Sympathizer continues. I didn't really feel like.
I felt like it didn't need a sequel, but I'm open to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't feel like it ended on like a quote unquote cliffhanger
Definitely
or anything
not,
where I was
yeah.
like, oh, I wonder what happens next. I felt like it was a satisfactory ending. So it would be interesting to see
Yeah.
how he creates a sequel out of it.
Yeah. And now apparently I'm a fan of short stories, so maybe I'll give those a go too. So
I'm always like so hit or miss on them.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things. I kind of alluded to this with certain like books and authors earlier, but it's one of those things where I think I like the idea more than I actually like. I'm always like, oh, I'm going to get into some short stories. And then they're just like hit or miss. There's no.
Well, I think they're probably harder in a way than
Yeah.
writing a full-length book because you have to get people interested really quickly, and it's probably hard to have a big emotional impact or convey a very important message in less pages, right? I think they're a good option for people who maybe don't have great attention spans. That it doesn't get talked about a lot. Like there's a lot of content online about how to build a reading habit or how to get into reading or how to stay focused. And myself included, I don't really see anybody talking about reading short stories, but we both read The Trees Grew Because I Bled There by Eric LaRocca. And I thought that was great. It was like, I have 10 minutes. Let me just like rip through 1 or 2 of these really quick and then I can put it down again. And then when I pick the book back up, there's not this moment of like, oh, where was I in the story again? Or what's going on? Let me read back a few pages. Like you can just pick up fresh and
Right. I have, I've often, we've talked before about how you sometimes, and me especially, I like to read multiple books at once.
Yeah.
And I will typically do that with short stories.
Yeah.
Like I'll have a collection going as, for lack of a better term, filler. Like if I don't have the time or bandwidth to get in, a chapter or more of whatever novel I'm reading, I can bang out 1 to 3 short stories.
Yeah.
Depending on the length of them. I did that recently a little bit with Borges. I did some rereading. I ended up putting that back on the shelf. I read a couple of the collections in there, and then
Well, that's pretty dense though, isn't it?
it is and it isn't. I mean, it's not easy reading. But it depends on the story.
Yeah.
It's not too dense.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not something, you can read when you're half asleep or if you're about to fall asleep. But I did that, if I, had 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever, I'd read a short story on my lunch break or something like that. But I just wanted, like I said, I was rereading and I just kind of wanted to move on to other things instead of dedicate time to a reread. So I put it back. But earlier this year, I did the same thing with Clarice Lispector's short story collection, or complete works, all of her short stories, complete stories, whatever it's called. She's a really interesting writer. So that was kind of a fun one. Even if I wasn't like super into the narrative or whatever, just the style of her writing is so unique. So it was fun to dip in and dip out of.
Nice.
But yeah.
Cool. Well, I think we'll forego the audiobook discussion.
I don't have much to say about that anyway. So
We can revisit that at a later date. Thanks everyone for listening. As always, share with your friends, leave a comment, let us know what you think, and we will see you in the next episode.
bye-bye.